911, what's the address of the emergency?
Hey, I like to report a blue truck that was stolen earlier today.
Is it your truck?
No, he's my friend and he stole it earlier today.
Days after 15-year-old Tina Fontaine made that call, she was murdered. But at the time, police didn't even know that 911 call existed. So they didn't know to look at the very man she named in it. So how did things go so wrong? And how did they end up catching him? Well, buckle up and let us tell you. I'm Ashley Flowers.
And I'm Brit.
And this is Crime Junkie. Brit, we know the ripple effect of homicides extends beyond the victim themselves. It changes the lives of dozens, maybe even hundreds of people as they have to adjust to their new reality. Not only the reality that someone is now gone, but also that someone else was evil enough to take their lives. And just like a ripple on water, it starts with one thing, like one moment that breaks the surface. And for Tina Fontaine, that moment happened far before her own murder. It was actually on October 31st, 2011. And that's the day that her father, Eugene, was beaten and left to succumb to his injuries behind a shed on the reservation where he lived in Manitoba. The two men who killed him were arrested, charged with manslaughter, and eventually found guilty. But that was cold comfort to a then 12-year-old Tina who was facing down the barrel of a whole life without her dad. Now, Eugene hadn't had custody of Tina and her little sister, Sarah. Their mom, Valentina, wasn't really in the picture either. Both of them had struggled with substance use disorder. So the girls lived with their great-aunt Thelma, who already had a long career as a foster mother. And despite Thelma showering the girls with all the love she could muster, love can only go so far in a situation like this. And slowly, over the following years, Thelma witnessed the big-hearted little girl that she'd raised start to change. According to Joanna Jolly's book, Red River Girl, she started having trouble in school, and then she started skipping school, and then she started running away. And Thelma was trying her best, even tried getting professionals to help manage her grief and growing behavior concerns. But help just was not readily available. After the murder of her father, Victim Services never offered grief counseling. And Thelma reached out herself about getting something set up with Victim Services, but nothing happened. And the one time Tina was actually referred to a counselor by Child and Family Services, or CFS, the sessions were too far away from their home on the Seguin First Nation Reserve to actually be able to go. Between late 2013 and April 2014, Tina ran away 3 times, always to Winnipeg, which is about an hour and a half southwest, and sometimes to her mom, Valentina's home. Now, Valentina had sort of reappeared in Tina and Sarah's lives after their dad's murder, and despite Thelma's concerns, the girls desperately wanted their mom to be a part of their lives. And so when Tina asked Thelma if she can go visit her mom in Winnipeg for a week in late June of 2014, Thelma says yes. Now, she still doesn't love that Valentina has made her way back into the girls' lives, but as far as Thelma knows, Valentina's doing well. The last time Tina and Sarah went to visit a few months ago, she'd called Valentina's social worker, who assuaged a lot of her worries. She had stable housing, and Valentina herself said that she was working on getting custody of her other children, who would have been Tina and Sarah's half-siblings. And so, according to Nancy McDonald's reporting for McLean, she gives Tina $60 and a phone card telling her to call if she needs anything. And then she's off, being driven by Thelma's daughter and son.
Just Tina, Sarah doesn't go?
No, so she was actually supposed to, but she decided last minute to stay back, which honestly was probably a blessing because no one could have guessed that an hour and a half away, Tina and her aunt and uncle would pull up to an empty home. Like, Valentina's not there, neither are her kids. And of course, like, Tina's relatives are a bit worried, but I guess Tina's like cool, calm, collected. She's like, listen, just drop me off at Valentina's sister's house, like nothing to be concerned about. Plus, she has plenty of family in the city that will watch out for her. So she's confident she's going to be okay. Valentina's going to come and get her. So her aunt and uncle agree to that. They agree to let her stay, trusting that Valentina and her family will watch out for the 15-year-old in their care. So they drop her off and drive off. And the weeks pass, and Thelma's waiting back home, not really hearing anything from Tina or Valentina all week. Not that she's really even expecting to, but when she calls Valentina's house, she can't get through because the phone line has been disconnected. And listen, how many times she calls, who else she reaches out to, unclear. But the long and the short of it is that when Thelma can't get a hold of Tina or Valentina on the phone, she knows in her bones that something is wrong. So she and her husband, Joe, drive down to Winnipeg, pull up in front of Valentina's house, only to find that Tina isn't there. Neither is Valentina or any of Tina's half-siblings. Because what Thelma hadn't known when she approved the trip, what maybe even Tina hadn't known, was that Valentina wasn't doing well. In the time between Tina and Sarah's last visit and now, she had slipped back into addiction, losing both her home and custody of her other kids.
Had Valentina actually ever met up with Tina after she got to Winnipeg?
Yes, so eventually, Thelma learned that Valentina had picked Tina up. But where they went is anyone's guess. And Thelma does not trust that Tina will be safe in her mom's care at this point. In fact, she's worried that Valentina maybe even abducted Tina so that she wouldn't leave Winnipeg.
Had she threatened to do that before?
I don't think so, but I think anything's on the table right now. And the idea that Valentina had something to do with Tina's sudden ghosting only grows when Thelma gets a Facebook message from a guy saying that he's worried that Valentina's using drugs with her daughter and that Tina might even be being sexually exploited.
Who is this guy exactly?
This guy is named Larry. He dated Tina earlier that year. That's who's messaging her. They broke up, but they're still friendly or whatever. Though I will say that there were some sources that called him Tina's current boyfriend, but I don't think that's accurate. So Thelma contacts CFS, who then tried to find Valentina, which they do. And I'm not sure where she is when CFS tracks her down, but one thing is clear. Tina's not with her.
Does she say where her daughter is?
She says she doesn't know. She says that she's barely been with Tina this whole time. Her story is that she picked her up from her sister's place. They hung out for a bit, a few days maybe, and then poof, Tina left or Valentina left, but basically they separated and she hasn't even heard from her daughter since. Well, it turns out there's a little more to the story. So Tina's sister Sarah pipes up and shows Thelma a message that she'd gotten from Tina. And I can't find the exact date that this was sent. This was sometime within the last 11 days or so. But it was a selfie from Tina, and in it she had a black eye, she had scratches on her face, and she said that it was their mom that had been the one to hurt her. And then in another message, she told Sarah to tell Thelma and her husband that she loved them, but she wasn't ready to come home yet. So Thelma goes and contacts various CFS agencies. She even contacts the police, anyone to help find Tina. According to the book Red River Girl, she and her husband even go to Winnipeg a second time to look for her. Places at the mall, local shopping areas, but they can't find her. And none of their extended family seems to know where she is either. By July 17th, over 2 weeks after she last saw Tina, Thelma is at her wit's end. So she makes the decision to let CFS officially take Tina into their care, hoping that they would maybe find her and keep her safe, get her the help that she needs, or get her to an environment that might be more suitable for her.
I guess I don't get it. What does transferring care to them help?
I didn't understand either, and I didn't know, you have so much, and granted, this is the Canadian system, but you have so much, more knowledge of, the foster care system. I didn't see how that would help, because it's not like they're not looking for her.
And they are involved with her.
Yeah. So I didn't know. Our
Yeah.
team tried to get in touch with Thelma or even people at CFS to have them try and help us understand, but no one has gotten back to us, or anyone we have talked to, they haven't been able to explain it any better than that's just what happened. But transferring care, long and short of it is, it didn't have the outcome I think Thelma was hoping for. Because on August 17th, one of Thelma's relatives tells her that they'd seen a Facebook post. And in this post, it says that Tina had been found, but she wasn't alive. And Thelma doesn't believe it at first. This is a Facebook post, right?
Yeah.
And they haven't heard anything. But the next day, police are there, knocking on their door, delivering the news that she had been praying to never hear. And what the investigation into Tina's death reveals is that she fell through every crack possible, was failed by every adult meant to protect her. She wasn't flying under the radar during this time. She was right there, able to be helped again and again and again, which made it easy for investigators to retrace her last steps through CFS and police reports. The first one being on July 17th. The first time Tina came into contact with someone in a position of authority was on July 17th. That is when she was picked up by the Winnipeg Police Service after someone reported seeing her screaming while she was being dragged down the street by an older guy. And once police arrived, they found Tina and the guy that she was fighting with, this 18-year-old named Cody Mason, who was identified as her boyfriend.
Her current boyfriend.
Right, not Larry, who messaged Thelma.
Got it.
So when police found Tina and Cody, they're both drunk, so police took them into custody and sent them to separate detox facilities to dry out. Now, because Thelma had given up custody by the time of this incident, Tina was discharged into the care of Child and Family Services. A piece from the Manitoba Advocate states that CFS put her up at a local hotel until a placement became available. But it seems like they did that without supervision or anyone to stay with her and make sure she was okay. This 15-year-old. And I know this because she was there one night and then she left.
I've never heard of any sort of child protective services leaving a minor.
I know.
Alone.
I felt
like my first thought goes to the fact that they're probably like all child protective services agencies, wildly understaffed.
For sure.
But that doesn't mean you just leave the kids alone.
I thought that I was reading it wrong when I first was looking into this because I could not imagine that happening here. But apparently leaving her alone in a hotel was fine, right in line with policies and procedures at the time. Now, later, CFS ends up removing this as an option. Yeah. So it's no longer in practice today, but because it was then, Tina was able to leave. So the next confirmed contact was a few days later. That's when Tina called CFS, basically just to say that she was okay. She was staying with her boyfriend, but no workers actually put eyes on her or could find even a placement for her. So then on July 23rd, Tina showed up at a CFS office in Winnipeg with Cody, her boyfriend, after which she went to a youth shelter. But then she bounced in and out of youth shelters, one of which reported her missing, but then canceled the report when she turned back up to that same shelter. And on nights when she wasn't in a shelter, she would crash on a relative's or even a friend's couch, or sometimes with Cody. And at one point, she even stayed with Cody's dad. So she's...
Wait, family members... Her family members know she's technically missing.
This is what I was saying. This is what's so frustrating. Some of them do. And I think this is one of the sadder parts of this story because it's not just the system and CFS who's failing her time and time again. It was her family and the other adults in her life because I guess when she would show up, and again, they knew people were looking for her, they were basically like, you know what? She looks happy. She looks sober. She's fine. And again, maybe it's because they knew she had nowhere to go. I don't know. But yes, she was popping up and there were sightings of her by family members in this time. Now, in early August, she was again in contact with a CFS worker, and they talked about finding a placement for her. But all that was available was another youth shelter, and CFS workers told her to bike there herself. So in and out of youth shelters, missing persons reports get filed and then taken back until August 8th, when Winnipeg police pulled over a drunk driver and they found Tina inside the car. Now, at first, she gave them a fake name, but she eventually told them her real one. And even though there was an active high-risk missing persons report filed for Tina at that time of this encounter, the officers let her go.
Why?
Well, one of the officers who pulled them over was new, so they said they just missed the report. And for some reason, they thought she looked 18 anyways, so I don't know. Again, every crack she fell through. Now, the same day that she has this encounter, Tina was found back behind a building unconscious with her skirt pulled down and no underwear. Now, we know this because she gets taken to a hospital where she tells people there that she had been drinking, been taking pills, and using other drugs, but she wouldn't talk about how she ended up in the alley. She told a doctor that she was going to go meet up with this guy named Sebastian, who she said was going to get her a bike. And when the doctor asked who Sebastian was, Tina apparently just kind of shrugged her shoulders and said he was a, quote, 62-year-old meth user that she sometimes liked to chill with. So she gets discharged that afternoon and put up in a hotel again. This time, I know she was being supervised, but by the next day, she's gone again.
How if she's being supervised?
Well, even the supervision that she had, apparently it wasn't like 24/7, so it was easy for her to slip away when she wanted to yet again. Now, when she didn't return to that last hotel, police issued a citywide BOLO on August 9th and several more times in the next week. And this is what kind of finally gets things in motion, because eventually Winnipeg police, Child and Family Services, and street outreach teams made a real effort to search for her. And they were supported by the Canadian Centre for Child Protection, which runs the missingkids.ca program. But now, over a month after she'd last been seen by Thelma, no one is able to find Tina. Not until August 17th, when a man and his son come across a body-shaped object wrapped in what appeared to be a blanket along the bank of the Red River in Winnipeg while scoping out fishing locations. Now, when they find this, they didn't open the blanket up or touch it. They ran immediately and contacted police. And it doesn't take long for police to respond, because while this guy and his son had been out there, they had actually seen a bunch of police boats and divers. According to coverage from CBC News, those crews had been on the water all weekend looking for a man who'd been reported struggling in the water on the Friday before. But this obviously wasn't the missing guy that they were looking for. And none of the crews that were out there were any part of the search for Tina. But when the man reports this discovery, that's who they've now found. Though it does take a minute to actually figure that out, because when they find her, she's pretty decomposed. So it is a tattoo on her back with her father's name, Eugene Fontaine, that eventually leads them to who Tina is. And when they unwrap what they find to be a duvet cover around her, weighed down by rocks, they saw that she was fully clothed. And there is no evidence of sexual assault, no clear cause of death. I mean, she has a few bumps and scratches, but nothing that would have been fatal. No broken bones, no sign that she'd been in any kind of a struggle. And the toxicology results don't support a drug overdose or even alcohol poisoning. Now, she had some cannabis in her system, but the tests are negative for other hard drugs. And in the end, the pathologist rules that Tina's cause and manner of death are undetermined. Now, the pathologist does say that the circumstances of her death are highly suspicious, though.
Yeah, she's wrapped up and weighed down by rocks.
Definitely. And even though that's the official word, right, undetermined, detectives are convinced that she actually was murdered. And the community is also convinced. And detectives are facing extraordinary pressure from every direction to solve this case. According to Katie Dangerfield's reporting for Global News, after Tina's death, more than 1,000 people marched in the streets calling for a national inquiry into missing and murdered First Nations women and girls. Because Manitoba, where this is all happening, it's kind of the epicenter of this crisis. And in fact, Joanna Jolly's book reports that the reserve that Tina's from, Saging First Nation, that reserve had the highest number of missing and murdered women and girls of any First Nations community in Canada. The problem here is it's hard to solve a case when you have no cause of death or no witnesses, no crime scene. Except they actually had their best lead right in front of them all along. And it took a witness coming forward to show them what was right under their noses. Because once public interest in Tina's case picks up, tips start coming in. People who'd seen her or interacted with her leading up to her death. And it led police to learn that Tina had been sex trafficked and she'd been using drugs on and off. And it also pointed them at some suspicious people who ultimately get excluded. But it was one tip from this dude named Robert that really changes everything. And this guy's like, hey, I actually saw Tina on August 6th, and she seemed really upset. She bummed a cigarette off of me. And this guy says that when they got to talking, she said that she'd been hanging out with some friends at a house nearby, and they'd left her alone in a room with this older dude. And he was clearly coming on to her, creeping her out big time. And when she told this guy that, no, she's not interested, he got aggressive and started yelling at her. And, by the way, this guy's like, oh, there's this other thing. Right before Tina came over and started talking to me, I noticed her make this call from a nearby payphone. Now, I don't think the guy overheard the call, but based on the location and the time, investigators were able to figure out exactly who she called that night.
911, what's the address of the emergency?
Hey, I like to report a blue truck that was stolen earlier today.
Okay, and do you know who stole it?
This guy named Sebastian.
Is it your truck?
What?
Is it your truck?
No, he's my friend and he stole it earlier today.
Okay, you need to call the police directly at 986
Yeah?
6222.
Yeah?
And when you get the recorded message, press 8. That'll take you directly to a person.
Okay then.
Okay,
Okay,
bye.
bye.
Sebastian's the guy she was going to get the bike from when she ended up unconscious behind that building, right?
Correct.
And what's the deal with this truck?
They don't know at the time, but they need to find, like that call didn't result in anything, basically. So they need to track the Sebastian guy down to kind of piece things together. And I know they track him to a house where he was apparently living in like a tent out back. And when they go there, this young woman answers the door. They ask for Sebastian, and she's like, who are you talking about? I don't know a Sebastian. And they're like, oh, we heard you had this guy, Sebastian, living in a tent in your backyard. And she's like, oh, are you talking about Frenchie?
Frenchie?
That's what she said. She's like, yeah, we've got a guy in a tent, or had a guy in a tent, but we know him as Frenchie. And the mom there tells police that she had offered this Frenchie guy basically to let him stay in a tent, like sometime in July. But she started really hating the way that Frenchie acted around her 15-year-old daughter. He was like staring at her, offering to get her drunk or high, like just terrible things, which is why no one was super sad that they hadn't seen him in a while. But they recommend police go visit the local scrapyard because they knew that he was a regular there. So they go there, and when they describe Sebastian/Frenchie to the woman working at the front desk, hoping she'd seen him recently, or more importantly, could give them his last name, she tells them she doesn't know Sebastian. She doesn't even know a Frenchie. But then when police describe his physical appearance, this white guy, early 50s, long grayish hair, she's like, oh yeah, no, I know him, but like his name isn't Sebastian or Frenchie. His name is Raymond Cormier. Police learned that Raymond Cormier is a 52-year-old with a long criminal record and a bunch of outstanding drug-related warrants. According to reporting in the Globe and Mail, Raymond had basically drifted all over Canada and was in and out of prison on a bunch of different convictions, including robbery, assault, theft, and fraud. And this guy spent a lot of years, like years and years and years in prison, not to mention his time on parole. So they start going on the hunt for this guy. But the problem is, it's like he's vanished. Now, thankfully, an out-of-the-blue call from an inmate at a local prison gives them a lucky break. So this inmate, his name is Ernest DeWolf. He's been locked up since August on theft charges, which is just like the latest in his own string of convictions. But Ernest tells investigators, like, hey, I'm not sure if anyone's told you this yet, but you should really look into this guy named Raymond Cormier for Tina's murder. And mind you, this is completely unprompted.
Yeah.
They haven't mentioned Tina. He's the one that does that. And they hadn't even mentioned Raymond either. Like, he's the one bringing him up. And he tells investigators he'd known Raymond a long time, like many years. They were kind of off and on, like friends. But they'd reconnected again just that summer. And he'd even hung out a few times with Raymond and Tina and another couple at a house in Winnipeg. So Ernest says that it was obvious that Raymond had sexual interest in Tina. And that just never sat right with him because Tina is quite literally a girl. She's a 15-year-old girl, and Raymond is an old-ass man. And he heard the two of them had gotten into some kind of altercation or fight. And I don't know if it was physical, but basically gotten into it over a stolen truck one night. And the next thing he knew, he was seeing the headlines about Tina's murder.
Okay, we need to pause for a second. I'm starting to put the pieces together.
It's messy. Like, the timeline is I get it. Yeah.
Okay, so August 6th, she calls 911 to report a truck stolen by Sebastian, who we now know is Raymond.
Sebastian Frenchie Raymond, yes.
Got it. Then that same night, she told that Robert guy she'd been at a house and there was an older man who made her feel like
Came on her.
uncomfortable. TBD, Sebastian Frenchie Raymond.
Yeah.
Then on the 8th, she was found in the back alley saying she was going to see this Sebastian Raymond because he was going to get her a bike. So he's like involved in all these moments.
Right. And then on the 9th, that's when they had their last sighting of her by a witness. I hadn't told you that part.
Okay.
But so we know she's seen on the 9th. But yes, he's like clearly like in her life these days.
In all these events.
Right. So Ernest had seen Raymond at least once after all of that went down. And Raymond told him about the stolen truck, about this argument that he'd had with Tina. Basically, she was pissed that he'd stolen it, which made Ernest super wary because he didn't want to be in the vicinity of a stolen truck because like he and Raymond were doing a lot of drugs at the time. Like he didn't want this stolen truck acting like a beacon leading police straight to where they were. But he says that Raymond's like, listen, like, don't worry about it. I've taken care of the problem.
The problem being the truck or the problem being Tina?
You tell me, right? Like, and listen, this thing he's saying, like, it's not the hard evidence that they're hoping to find, but it's not nothing, especially since Ernest was able to give them another missing piece of the puzzle. They had been looking for the house of these supposed friends of Tina's named Sarah, not her sister Sarah, but Sarah and Tyrell. Because I guess Cody had at one point told investigators that he and Tina had spent some time there. But and this was still looking for her at the time. They couldn't find it. Cody couldn't remember the address, whatever. Well, fast forward, Ernest does them a solid because he knows the address. So that's where they go next. Again, we're just trying to get more info. So when they get there, they find Sarah, but not Tyrell. And she says he doesn't live there anymore, but she does agree to go with them to the station to answer some questions. And they're like, this is crazy. They're like just getting into the car when investigators see someone open the back door to Sarah's house to put out the garbage. And I have to imagine like the first thing is they're like, oh, you liar, it's Tyrell.
Yeah.
Because she hadn't said anyone was there. They didn't realize anyone was going to be there. It's not Tyrell, by the way. And she's like, oh, yeah. I have a friend staying with me at the moment. And they look up and they like really look at him and they realize like, oh my God, this is Raymond staying at her house.
So they like went there to try to find any information that she might have about, and they find him.
Raymond. According to Cameron McLean's reporting for CBC News, Raymond tries to run. They end up chasing him down, arresting him on some outstanding warrants. And when they talk to him, Raymond insists that he had nothing to do with Tina's death. And he tells police they're wasting their time focusing on him. Now, he admits that he had a sexual interest in Tina when they first met. But he says, like, once he found out she was under 18, like, he didn't anymore. He wasn't attracted to her, which, like, come on. Like, no, that's not what they've been hearing from everyone else. They're with him in an interview room for like 8 hours on and off. And the longer they're in there, the more hostile and aggressive he gets. And the grosser his comments about Tina get. It turns out his interest in her did not die down when he learned that she was just 15. And as the night goes on, police see more and more of what they think is the real Raymond, this hot-headed sexual predator with a history of violence. And they end up holding him there and then convicting him on a theft charge. So he's in jail while they try to firm up their case against him for Tina's murder. But their case against him for that murder is really weak. I mean, there was some physical evidence collected from the duvet cover that Tina was found in, like some hairs that they did get like 8 different DNA profiles from, but none of them are Raymond's DNA. Though, I mean, that's to say, like, none of them are necessarily from a killer, though, right? Like,
right. Anyone could have left them there.
Right. So the DNA, his DNA being on there would have been a nice to have, but it would not have sealed the deal in any kind of way. Since he admitted to knowing her, right?
Being around her, stuff like that.
Yeah. So there isn't anything that investigators can tie to Raymond as far as physical evidence goes.
So what do they have on Raymond then?
Other than the stories they've heard, not much. So I know they start showing like the duvet, like a picture of the duvet cover around, and witnesses they interview say like, yeah, they recognize it. Yes, we think it's Raymond's. It's not in his possession anymore, so that's suspicious. But again, not a slam dunk by any means. Still, Winnipeg police are sure that they have the right guy. But they know that if they're going to get this case across the finish line, what they need is a confession. The jail time he'd been serving didn't seem to be inspiring him to talk. So when he gets out, investigators decide to try another approach, a Mr. Big Sting. And I know we've talked about these on the show before, but like for our newbies or for a refresher, Brett, you want to give the people the lowdown on what a Mr. Big Sting is?
Gladly. So a Mr. Big Sting is when undercover officers pretending to be part of an organized crime group have a kind of meet cute with a suspect, during which the undercover officers basically say, hey, you want to make some money? We've got some jobs for you. The jobs start small, like helping someone move or driving a car from one place to another, but that leads to bigger jobs and more money, kind of bringing them into the fold of this fake crime syndicate, making them feel trusted and important. And eventually, there's some kind of meeting with the head of this organization, Mr. Big, who finds out about this police investigation in question and the person's role as a potential suspect. And they use that information to kind of say, like, just tell me what happened. Tell me the whole truth. And we'll take care of you. I can protect you.
Or sometimes, like, I've even seen them do it where it's like, well, you need to, like, give us something so we can, like, trust you.
Yes.
Here's what we've done.
Yes. And if everything goes well, the suspect will confess everything that actually happens. And what always floors me is it has a pretty high success rate, between like 75 and 95% success rate.
Well, success rate, TBD, because like I think about like the way people view success rates of confessions here in the U.S., like which we now know, like not that all confessions are, but like when they're coerced or like false confessions.
Well, that's the thing. This is really controversial, bordering on coercion, like you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually illegal here in the U.S., but this case is taking place in Canada.
Yeah, so these stings are like very elaborate, very expensive, and very risky.
Mm-hmm.
And they take time. Like this one took 6 months. Joanna Jolly's book on this case goes down like this like play-by-play like of this sting. So if you're really interested, I recommend you check that out. And listen, I know we talked about Mr. Big Stings on the show before, and like every single time I'm shocked at how the whole thing works. Like, I can't believe they've been doing this for so long in Canada. It seems like the fact that, like, it's so well known and people know, like, how does anyone fall for it anymore?
Yeah.
I know. But this wasn't your typical sting operation because Raymond is not your typical suspect. What is most interesting to me about this particular sting is how close Raymond came to figuring the whole thing out. Like, he was sus right from the start. Within a couple of weeks, he was saying that he thought the police had undercover officers spying on him at his employment assistant's office. And by the end of the operation, Raymond was legit pointing out actual undercover officers saying, like, he's pretty sure, like, I'm pretty sure that guy's following us. And he's like, I think he's watching me. He was caught on.
He was calling it.
I know.
Yeah.
And typically what happens in a Mr. Big Sting is that there's like this big come to Jesus moment where the Mr. Big guy demands the person come clean and confess because it's the only way the organization can protect him. But Raymond just keeps saying, like, I didn't murder her. I didn't murder her. Even as the pressure builds and builds and builds. And by the end of it, he is legit saying to Mr. Big, this doesn't add up. Like, something's not right. The police are up to something. He doesn't know how far that they'll go to get him to admit to killing Tina.
So he doesn't confess?
Not in the classic Mr. Big way, no. But as part of the sting, they bug his apartment. And on those tapes, he admits that he had sex with Tina, which, of course, he had denied before when he was speaking to police. According to Joanna Jolly's book, police also hear, like, through this bug, they hear him talking to a young woman about Tina, saying that she, quote, got killed because I found out she was 15 years old, end quote.
So he killed Tina because he found out how young she was?
Well, so this is the thing. Like, he never says who got killed or who killed her. Like, he's very vague, equally as vague when he talks about being haunted by something and how he threw someone into a body of water. And their surveillance also shows Raymond's interest in young girls. Like, he would often bring young Indigenous girls back to his apartment, give them drugs in exchange for sex. In fact, he told one of them to be careful and not overdose, or else he would wrap her up in a carpet and throw her in the river. And there is also tape of him screaming at a woman that he was dating, saying that there's a little girl in a grave someplace screaming at the top of her lungs for him to finish the job, and he did finish the job.
But that's still not an actual confession.
No, Raymond never says, "I killed Tina." But investigators feel that they have enough to charge him with Tina's murder, which they do on December 9th of 2015. Raymond's trial begins just over 2 years later in January of 2018. And while they don't have an eyewitness or DNA evidence or a smoking gun, what they have is a pile of circumstantial evidence pointing to Raymond, the only person they know of who had both the means and the motive to kill Tina. But I'm going to cut right to the chase. It's not enough. After closing statements, the jury deliberates for less than a day before finding Raymond not guilty. And the public's response to the verdict is one of outrage. And much of it is directed at the complete failure of this system that everyone feels like should have protected Tina, but failed her right up until the very end. Raymond Cormier died in 2024, taking with him any secrets he might have been harboring. But in the wake of this tragedy, many people have tried to come together and fill in the gaps that were found where the system did fail. A volunteer group called Drag the Red was formed to drag the Red River, searching for bodies or evidence of even other murder investigations. The Bear Can Patrol was reignited to help organize searches and crime prevention in Winnipeg's North End. And an organization called Andinaway, which is dedicated to supporting Indigenous youth in urban settings, they launched a program called Tina's Safe Haven, which provides safe places for young people to do things like laundry or eat a hot meal and just be a kid in a safe space. We've made a donation to the organization. And if you would like to join us or learn more, we're going to have the information to that organization in the episode description. Reminder, you can find all the source material for this episode on our website, crimejunkiepodcast.com.
You can follow us on Instagram at Crime Junkie Podcast.
And we'll be back next week with a brand new episode.
People are strange creatures. They kill for the most ridiculous reasons you can possibly imagine. Over my decades in law enforcement, I have looked into the eyes of individuals who took a human life over a minor insult, a few dollars, or a fantasy built entirely on lies. It never ceases to amaze me how thin the veneer of civilization really is. When you strip away the polite smiles and the manicured lawns, you often find a bottomless well of malice. But then, there are those other cases. The ones that do not just anger you, but shake you to your very core. The cases where love turns into a toxic, suffocating rope, and where the line between a lifetime of sacrifice and cold-blooded murder gets blurred until it snaps. I have 2 stories for you today. 2 tales of women who deserved a long, beautiful life, but instead met their end at the hands of absolute cowards. My. Let's start with Rowan County, North Carolina, in the summer of 2013. Kannapolis is a quiet, family-based community nested between Charlotte and Greensboro. It is a growing textile town with upper-middle-class homes sitting within eyeshot of each other. It is not the kind of place where you expect to find a slaughterhouse. But on July 23rd, 2013, at precisely 9:40 in the morning, a phone call to 911 shattered that peaceful Tuesday. The caller was 59-year-old Chuck Reeves, and he was terrified. He had arrived at the home of his fiancée, 62-year-old Shirley Pierce. They were planning a wedding, planning to grow old together after Shirley had finally found a true love of her life. Instead, Chuck walked into a house that felt incredibly eerie. He saw blood on the floor, a white powder, and then he heard the shower running. In the bathtub, under the running water, lay Shirley. She was motionless. She was gone. When the local detectives crossed that threshold, the first thing that hit them was the smell of bleach. Now, if you are a detective, bleach is a word you never want to hear. It means someone was busy trying to clean up their mess. It means they knew about DNA and were trying to erase their fingerprints from the earth. There was a bloody path leading from the bedroom into the bathroom, and there laid Shirley Daney, professional beautiful Shirley, with multiple stab wounds to her neck and face. This was not a burglary gone wrong. Nothing was ransacked. This was a ferocious, deeply personal attack driven by someone possessing an unbelievable amount of rage. Naturally, the spotlight turned directly onto Chuck Reeves. In my line of work, you always look at the spouse or the lover first. It is just basic mathematics. But Chuck was devastated, cooperative, and his alibi was as solid as a granite block. He was out of town working in South Carolina, a fact confirmed by his employer. More importantly, his hands were completely clean, lacking a single scratch, which is highly unusual for someone who just engaged in a violent knife attack. So we look elsewhere. Shirley's daughter, Tracy, arrived at the scene, utterly broken. When asked who could possibly hate her mother this much, Tracy brought up an ex-boyfriend named Richard from 10 years prior. Richard had been abusive, resulting in a restraining order after he threatened to stab Shirley with a screwdriver. But when detectives located Richard at a nearby pawn shop, they found a frail man who could barely walk due to severe health issues. He was physically incapable of carrying out such a brutal assault, and his hands were completely unmarred. Just as the trail was turning cold, the phone rang. It was a call that would stun any seasoned investigator. A man named Irvin Johnson, the chief financial officer of Tuscarora Yarns, where Shirley had worked as an executive secretary, called 911. He believed his own wife, 61-year-old Marlene Johnson, had killed Shirley. I tell you, it is a rare day when a spouse calls to report their partner for murder. Irvin was highly agitated, and as he sat down with detectives, a picture of a dark, twisted obsession began to emerge. Marlene was a woman born into wealth, accustomed to getting her way, dressed to the nines and oozing privilege. But in 2003, she suffered a severe nervous breakdown and tried to end her life. From that point on, she was erratic, intense, and consumed by an insane, possessive jealousy. She constantly accused Irvin of having affairs with single women at his workplaces. When Irvin took his job at Tuscarora Yarns and introduced Marlene to Shirley, being a warm Southern belle, called him honey and touched his arm. That was all it took. In Marlene's fractured mind, a grand affair was underway. For years, Marlene stalked Shirley. She hired private investigators, used drones to get aerial views of Shirley's house, and memorized her grocery shopping times and daily routines. Shirley was not afraid because she knew she had done absolutely nothing wrong. But madness does not care about innocence. In 2011, Marlene's paranoia boiled over at a local restaurant. Dressed in black and hiding behind a menu, she waited until Shirley tried to leave, then launched herself like a wild beast, grabbing Shirley by the hair and slamming her around, screaming that she would kill her. Shirley, out of kindness for Irvin, refused to press criminal charges, hoping a restraining order would suffice. Irvin eventually moved out and got his own restraining order, living in constant fear that he would be next on Marlene's hit list. Armed with this knowledge, detectives obtained search warrants. In the trunk of Marlene's car, parked at her attorney's office, they found a hoard of cleaning supplies. Inside her home, they discovered aerial photos of Shirley's house and stacks of surveillance photographs. It was a physical manifestation of a deadly fixation. When Marlene sat in the interview room, she wore sunglasses, acting bored and completely detached, but her hands told the real story. Her French manicured nails were broken, and her fingers were covered in cuts, the classic signature of an assailant whose hand slipped down a knife blade during a frenzied stabbing. Detectives formally charged her, but they still had to break her alibi. Her friend, a motivational speaker named Tim Connor, initially claimed she was with him all night. But when the autopsy revealed a stainless steel knife blade broken off inside Shirley's neck, detectives searched Tim's home and found a knife set with one identical blade missing. Confronted with the evidence, Tim crumbled. He admitted Marlene had begged him to lie for her. Her alibi vanished. When the state crime lab matched Marlene's DNA to the bloody shower curtain, the puzzle was complete. In January of 2018, Marlene stood trial. She sat there looking demure and untouchable, but when the jury came back with a speedy guilty verdict, she gasped and collapsed onto the floor. She was sentenced to spend the rest of her days behind bars. She was a coward who stole a beautiful life because of a phantom affair that existed only in her own sick mind. It is absolutely unbelievable. Now, let us travel further south to St. Petersburg, Florida, in May of 2005. A cleaning crew was sent to a foreclosed mobile home on Yellow Pine Drive. The neighbors said no one had been inside for months. As the crew cleared out the house, they noticed a mountain of car air fresheners, baking soda, and potpourri scattered everywhere. The smell of decay was overpowering. In the final bedroom, they found a heavy bundle wrapped in towels, sheets, and plastic bags. When they moved it, the plastic tore, revealing a human leg and foot. The body was heavily mummified, so badly decomposed that the gender and race were completely indistinguishable. But the medical examiner quickly found the cause of death, a single bullet hole to forehead, no exigund, a clear-cut homicide. County records showed the home belonged to two sisters, Barbara and Debbie Burns. They had vanished. To understand what happened in that trailer, you have to look into the tragic history of the Burns family. Barbara was the oldest daughter, born in 1951. When her youngest sister, Debbie, was born in 1964, she contracted scarlet fever at 2 years old, leaving her with permanent brain damage and the mental capacity of a 6-year-old child. When their father died shortly after, their mother had to work, and 15-year-old Barbara was forced to drop out of high school to become Debbie's full-time caregiver. Her own childhood ended in an instant. For 40 years, Barbara's life was not her own. She worked minimum-wage jobs, cared for her ailing mother, who eventually died of Alzheimer's, and endured the constant, demanding, and often physically abusive tantrums of Debbie, who walked with a limp from scoliosis and had only 3 teeth. Debbie was rude, bossy, and childish, once even hitting Barbara and turning a beer bottle over her head at a restaurant because she wanted to go home. Then, in 2001, their brother John died and left them a $350,000 inheritance. For the first time, they had money. Barbara quit her job, and they traveled California and Australia. They bought the mobile home on Yellow Pine Drive. But Debbie had no impulse control. She spent thousands on Star Wars toys and online shopping, and even mailed expensive gifts to a man in Miami who she falsely believed was going to marry her. Within 3 short years, the entire $350,000 was completely gone. They were broke, the home was in foreclosure, and the old bickering returned with a vengeance. Barbara had to go back to work, while Debbie demanded more and more money that they simply did not have. Detectives tracking the missing sisters found that even though Debbie was supposedly missing, her monthly Social Security checks of $651 were being cashed at an automated teller machine in Virginia Beach. Surveillance footage showed the person cashing them was Barbara, who was now working at a local 7-Eleven. Detectives flew to Virginia Beach and met Barbara at the end of her shift. She came with them quietly. In the interview room, she initially tried to lie, claiming she had no sister and had never lived on Yellow Pine Drive. But when detectives showed her Debbie's picture and told her she was dead, the wall of denial collapsed. Barbara confessed. On August 14th, Debbie's 40th birthday, they had a terrible physical fight over money. After they went to bed, sharing the same room where their heads almost touched, Barbara lay there listening to her sister snore. She realized at the moment Debbie woke up, the screaming, the abuse, and the endless cycle of misery would start all over again. She just could not take it anymore. She took a gun they kept for protection, placed it against Debbie's head, and pulled the trigger. She wrapped her sister's body in plastic, lived in that same house with a decomposing corpse for 6 weeks, using air fresheners to mask the smell, and then took a bus to Virginia Beach, the only place she had happy childhood memories of. It was a tragic, heartbreaking confession. The state recognized that Barbara was not a threat to the public, but rather a good person who had simply snapped after 40 years of carrying an unbearable burden alone. They offered her a plea deal of 15 years for manslaughter, which she accepted. In prison, for the first time in her life, someone else cooked for her, and she was free from the relentless responsibility of caregiving. She served 12 years and was released in 2018. She still misses her sister every single day, wishing she could see her face. You have to be kidding me. Sometimes, circumstances create a devil, and they create a breaking point. 2 lives destroyed, 2 completely different paths to a dark place. One driven by an evil, selfish obsession, and the other by a desperate, exhausted mind pushed past the brink of human endurance. I tell you, the human heart is a fragile, terrifying thing. Human beings are strange creatures, and I tell you, they kill for the most ridiculous reasons you can possibly imagine. When you spend decades looking at the worst of humanity, you realize that some people carry a hollow space inside themselves, a dark, hungry void that they try to fill by controlling and eventually destroying the people around them. In my line of work, you see this pattern repeat itself like a bad dream. Our story begins in the crisp air of the Prescott National Forest in Arizona, a beautiful place where people go to escape, to ride dirt bikes, or, on the evening of September 29, 1988, to do a little target shooting. As the sun went down, one shooter was packing up his gear near a popular local gathering spot known to the kids as Gordo's Pit. He noticed a pile of garbage bags that had been partially burned, and poking out of the ash was what looked like a stick. He walked over to get a closer look, and my, it was not a stick at all. It was a human arm. The local sheriff's office and the police department soon descended on the scene, finding a body that had been set on fire and burned completely beyond recognition. It was brutal, it was demeaning, and it was a direct attempt to erase a human being from the face of the earth. In those days, we did not have the fancy deoxyribonucleic acid testing we have today. We had to rely on dental records, which eventually confirmed the victim was 19-year-old Pamela Pitts. Pam was a beautiful, vibrant young girl with a bright smile, a mentor to her younger siblings, and a kid who just wanted to enjoy life. She had recently moved out of her family home to share an apartment with an 18-year-old girl named Shelley Norgard. Now, if you want to understand this crime, you have to look deep into the minds of these 2 young women. Pam was full of light, trusting, and ready to take on the world. Shelley, on the other hand, was a young woman shaped by abandonment, a girl whose mother had left, whose father was a strict taskmaster, and who desperately feared being sent back to a home where she felt unloved. Shelley clung to Pam not as a friend, but as a lifeline, an emotional anchor. But lifelines can turn into chains. Within a couple of months, the girls began to argue about money and unpaid rent. Pam, feeling the tension, quietly decided she was going to move back home with her father, but she had not yet told Shelley. When Pam disappeared on September 16, 1988, her father reported her missing. Curiously, Pam's car, her purse, and all her personal belongings were left behind at the apartment, a detail that Shelley mysteriously failed to mention to Pam's father when she called him to ask if he had seen her. You have to be kidding me. If your roommate vanishes and leaves her entire life behind, you notice. When detectives sat down with Shelley, she offered a shaky, wandering alibi about driving around for hours after watching a movie. Her boyfriend at the time, Ray Clerks, could not back up her timeline, and soon, friends started telling investigators that Shelley had been furious on the night of the disappearance, claiming Pam was responsible for everything wrong in her life. Even more chilling, Shelley had a history of musing aloud about how to dispose of a body, suggesting that burning someone beyond recognition was the best way to make them disappear forever. But back then, without physical evidence or a confession, the case went cold, leaving Pam's family in an agonizing limbo for years. But a killer's psychology does not change. It only waits for the next trigger. On May 25, 1991, some college students exploring a cave found a badly decomposed body wrapped in a waterbed liner, suspended in a vertical mine shaft. The victim had been shot in the head. It was 24-year-old Ray Clerks, Shelley's boyfriend. Ray had been planning to move back to California and leave Shelley behind. There was again the ultimate trigger for Shelley's fragile, possessive ego, abandonment. If she could not have him, nobody would. This time, the physical evidence spoke volumes. A fingerprint belonging to Shelley was recovered from a flashlight found in the mine shaft, and her car trunk smelled heavily of death, containing blood matching Ray's type. In 1993, facing first-degree murder, Shelley accepted a plea deal for second-degree murder and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. She confessed to shooting Ray on the hood of her car because he wanted to take the dogs and leave her. It was a classic display of her extreme narcissistic rage. Yet, without a direct connection, Pam's case remained cold for another 18 long years. It was not until March of 2011, when a cold case team reopened the file, that a detective decided to listen to 97 recorded prison phone calls Shelley made right before her release. On one call to her father, discussing the detective's renewed interest in Pam's death, her father admitted he had been thinking about it for 20 years and said that she had never actually told him what happened. The line went completely silent. That silence was a sound of guilt. It was enough to secure an indictment, and on June 2nd, 2017, Shelley was arrested for the murder of Pam Pitts. By then, 30 years had passed. Witnesses had passed away or lost their memories, making a trial a 50-50 gamble. To ensure she was convicted, prosecutors offered a plea deal. On March 1st, 2021, Shelley Harmon stood in court and confessed. She claimed she confronted Pam at Gordo's pit. They fought, and she simply could not stop hitting Pam until she stopped breathing. She walked out of court a free woman that day, having received credit for the decades she had already served. It is a frustrating end, and I tell you, it does not look like the complete justice we always hope for. But a confession is a conviction, and the world now knows exactly who Shelley Harmon is. A cold, possessive killer who took 2 lives because she could not handle the pain of being left behind. Pam and Ray are gone, but their memories remain, preserved by those who love them, while the woman who tried to erase them must live the rest of her days with her dark deeds finally brought into the light. Humans are strange creatures, and they kill for the most ridiculous reasons you could possibly imagine. But when greed and obsession take the wheel, a man stands no chance. I tell you, in my years of looking at the worst of humanity, I have learned that the people closest to you are often the most dangerous because they know exactly where to insert the knife. Let us look at Fred Brown, a 45-year-old man who spent his life doing everything right, serving his country bravely in the United States Army during the Vietnam War, only to end up face down in a grassy ditch off Highway 68 in rural Guilford County, North Carolina, on the morning of April 25, 1991. Some municipal workers found him just after 8 o'clock in the morning and called 911, and when the authorities arrived, they found a station wagon and a quiet family man with 2 bullets in his head and 1 in his back. But what really made the hair on the back of my neck stand up was a footprint on his shirt, because someone had stood directly over this decent man, placed their foot on his back, and executed him. You have to be kidding me. That is not a random robbery. No matter how much the missing wallet tried to scream otherwise, that is personal, that is calculated, and that is pure, cold-blooded execution. Fred was a truly nice guy, a high school classmate of the investigating major, a man who became an economics professor, and simply wanted to live a quiet life. But his mistake was marrying Patricia DeRosa back in 1969. Patricia grew up dirt poor in Oklahoma, and she viewed Fred as her white knight, a ticket out of the struggles of her childhood. But as the years rolled on and they settled in High Point, North Carolina, with 2 children, her health began to deteriorate. In 1990, she underwent open-heart surgery, and when she went to Alabama to recuperate with her mother and her sister Sheila, something shifted in her mind. She returned home obsessed with exotic birds, filling her upscale house with 50 or 60 screaming creatures that drove Fred absolutely crazy. Yet Fred, being the dutiful husband, tolerated the noise, hired housekeepers, and even began expensive renovations to build her a bird room, a hot tub, and a privacy fence. But Fred was drowning in the debt she was racking up, and their home became a psychological pressure cooker. Fred actually walked into a colleague's office at Guilford Technical Community College and said, point blank, that he would not be surprised if his wife took a contract out on him, because they would be better off with him dead. My. He was a man trapped by his own morals, refusing to get a divorce because of his religious beliefs, choosing instead to stay in a house of horror with a volatile woman who grew to despise him simply because he represented a limit on her spending. The investigation went ice cold for over 3 years while Patricia collected the life insurance, sold the family land, took her hundreds of thousands of dollars, and moved to Alabama to start a pet shop, thinking she had committed the perfect crime. But the universe has a way of balancing the ledger, and on July 13, 1994, a call came from Reading, Pennsylvania, because a woman had opened a letter left by her deceased father, Leroy Wetzel, marked to be opened only upon his death. Inside was a dark, handwritten confession detailing how he had murdered Fred Brown. Leroy was a small, heavily tattooed career criminal with a vicious temper, nicknamed Short Circuit, who stood only 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighed just 145 pounds. He also happened to be the ex-husband of Patricia's sister, Sheila. It turns out that while Patricia was recovering in Alabama, she asked Sheila if she knew anyone who could kill her husband, and Leroy agreed to do the job for $30,000, a sum Patricia promised to pay once she received a $250,000 life insurance payout. On April 24, 1991, Patricia called Leroy and told him the stage was set because she would be teaching a real estate class and her daughter would be out, leaving Fred entirely alone. Leroy drove to North Carolina, called Fred at 9:30 in the evening, claiming his car had broken down on the highway. And when the helpful, trusting Fred arrived to assist him, Leroy pulled out a .22 caliber pistol, told Fred his wife wanted him dead, and shot him in the back as Fred desperately ran for his life, before walking over to fire 2 more rounds into his skull. Leroy fixed his car, drove away, and later realized he forgot to make it look like a robbery. So he actually walked back to the corpse, stole the wallet, and threw it away on his drive back to Alabama, calling Patricia in the middle of the night to confirm the deed was done. But here's the punchline of this tragic joke. Patricia never paid him a single dime of the $30,000 because she claimed she did not have the money, proving that if you were going to hire a cheap criminal to do your dirty work, you had better expect them to write a letter about it when you stiff them. Armed with telephone records showing conspiracy and a traffic ticket placing Leroy in the area, detectives arrested Patricia and Sheila in July of 1994. At her trial in May of 1995, Leroy took the stand and physically shook as he reenacted the execution with a stapler, while the defense tried to claim Leroy was merely blackmailing Fred over an imaginary affair. The jury did not buy the lies, finding Patricia guilty of first-degree murder and sentencing her to life in prison, where her failing health finally caught up with her, and she died in 2002, less than 7 years into her sentence. While Leroy and Sheila both pled guilty to second-degree murder and received 50-year sentences. It is a terrible, senseless tragedy where a good, decent man who survived the battlefields of Vietnam was slaughtered in a dark ditch by a greedy, ungrateful woman who destroyed 2 families and clipped her own wings over a pile of debt and a house full of birds. detectives gently but firmly brought Willie in for questioning regarding a violation of his parole. The detectives used their exceptional communication skills, explaining the fascinating science of genetics to the young man. When Willie understood that science had placed him at the apartment, the weight of his secret became too heavy to bear. With a rush of emotion, he confessed. Willie explained that he had not acted alone. He had been directed by his uncle, 52-year-old Bobby Guillory. Willie, being young and feeling trapped by his circumstances, had followed his uncle on that fateful drive to Arlington. Willie detailed how they had staged the apartment to look like a gang-related incident, leaving the bandana and the bottles exactly as the detectives had smartly deduced. Chapter 6. Unmasking the Mastermind. The story took an astonishing turn when Willie revealed the true architect behind the tragic events. It was not a random act, nor was it a simple robbery. It was a plot orchestrated by Daphne Wright, the very spiritual advisor who had promised to save the family. Detectives learned that Daphne was functioning as a spiritual loan shark. When Chow and Hong could not pay the astronomical fees for her mystical services, Daphne's greed consumed her. Willie explained that Daphne had told his uncle Bobby that she wanted the couple gone so she could collect on the massive life insurance policies the family held. She had even provided the key to the apartment. The detectives traveled to the city of Katy to speak with Bobby Guillory. At first, the older man was hesitant, but the undeniable power of truth soon encouraged him to open up. Bobby, who had no prior criminal record, explained that he had been desperate and struggling to survive when Daphne approached him with the promise of $10,000. Bobby expressed deep remorse, shedding tears as he recounted the events, proving that even those who make terrible mistakes carry the heavy burden of a conscience. Bobby confirmed Daphne's role as the puppet master, but he also dropped a revelation that completely blindsided the seasoned investigators. When asked how Daphne had obtained the key to the apartment, Bobby stated that she had received it from none other than the son-in-law, Chow Tran. Chapter 7. The Power of Truth and Testimony. The investigation had now blossomed into a complex narrative of betrayal, greed, and the pursuit of money. The detectives approached Daphne Wright, a woman who projected an image of absolute control. When confronted with the evidence and the testimonies of the Guillory men, she remained obstinate, refusing to cooperate. A thorough search of her majestic Houston home revealed a hidden ledger, documenting the exorbitant fees she charged her clients for her supposed magical interventions. The ledger was a stunning testament to her manipulation of vulnerable people seeking hope. To secure a flawless victory for justice, the prosecutors made a strategic legal decision. They needed to fully expose Daphne's orchestrations. They approached Chow Tran, offering him a shield of immunity in exchange for his complete and honest testimony about the inner workings of the scheme. During the trial in the year 2019, the courtroom became a stage for education and revelation. Chow testified about the immense psychological control Daphne had exerted over the family. He spoke of the fear of her supposed curses and the overwhelming debt that had clouded their judgment. The defense attorneys masterfully debated the facts, pointing out the lack of traditional financial documentation and suggesting that Chow himself was the ultimate beneficiary of the insurance funds. It was a brilliant display of the American legal system at work, where every perspective is rigorously examined. Chapter 8. A Legacy of Light. In the peaceful month of September, the jury, representing the thoughtful voice of the community, reached their conclusion. Daphne Wright was found guilty of her primary role in the tragedy and was sentenced to spend the rest of her natural life in a secure facility, ensuring she could never again manipulate the hopes and fears of the vulnerable. While the legal outcome left some detectives feeling that the scales of justice were not perfectly balanced regarding Chow Tran's involvement, the overarching triumph was undeniable. The truth, which had hidden in the dark for so long, had finally been brought into the brilliant light of day. The story of the Arlington Police Department's unwavering dedication serves as an inspiring reminder that no matter how complex the puzzle, patience and scientific brilliance will eventually reveal the picture. As the years move forward, the vibrant community of Arlington chooses to focus not on the shadows of the past, but on the bright, beautiful legacy left behind by Long Nguyen and Hong Lee. They are remembered not for the tragic end of their journey, but for the profound love they shared, the incredible business they built with their own hands, and the joyous, generous spirit they brought to their neighborhood. Their memory is a gentle, comforting beacon, reminding everyone that while greed and deception may temporarily disrupt our lives, it is love, community, and truth that ultimately endure forever. The city of Arlington, Texas, has always been a tapestry of woven dreams, a place where the wide-open skies of the United States promise a canvas large enough for anyone willing to paint their future with hard work and hope. In the year 2000, Long Nguyen and his beloved wife Hong Lee arrived under those boundless skies, carrying with them the rich, time-honored traditions of their homeland, Vietnam. They were a couple whose very presence radiated warmth. Long, a man in his 70s with a gentle smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and Hong, whose kindness was a well-known comfort to everyone she met, did not come to rest. They came to build a legacy. They brought their 3 children and their deep, abiding love for family, ready to plant new roots in a community that welcomed them with open arms. Arlington in those days was blossoming into a vibrant hub of diverse cultures. The great wave of Vietnamese immigrants that began in the late 70s and continued through the 80s and 90s had transformed certain neighborhoods into bustling centers of commerce, culture, and culinary delight. Long and Hong studied the area carefully, realizing it was the perfect soil to nurture their ambitions. They were not merely seeking a quiet retirement. They were pursuing the grand American dream. With their life savings and a spirit of determination that inspired everyone around them, they established a commercial sewing business. The hum of sewing machines became the heartbeat of their new life. They enlisted the help of their family, most notably their 38-year-old son-in-law. Chow Tran, Chow, who spoke fluent English, became the charismatic face of the operation, negotiating with contractors and managing the day-to-day logistics. For nearly a decade, the Nguyen family thrived. Their sewing shop was a testament to dedication, eventually securing incredibly lucrative contracts, including an esteemed partnership with a global entertainment giant like Disney. They were a prominent, respected family. Neighbors waved to them in the mornings, and the local community looked up to their success as a shining example of what could be achieved through unity and perseverance. Yet, as the years rolled on toward the year 2011, the winds of fortune began to shift. The global economy fluctuated, the prestigious contracts slipped away, and the once thriving business faced an agonizing decline. In times of immense stress, when the modern world seemed to offer no solutions, many find solace in the ancient traditions of their ancestors. For thousands of years, Asian cultures have held a deep respect for spiritual advisors, seeking their wisdom to invite good fortune and ward off misfortune. It was an old-style mysticism, a belief in guardians of prosperity and protectors of the home. When a family faced a major crisis, whether it was financial ruin or a sudden string of bad luck, they would often turn to these traditional healers for guidance. It was a beautiful, deeply human desire to find hope in the unseen. Encouraged by his mother-in-law, Chow Tran scoured the local Vietnamese newspaper and found an advertisement that promised a return to prosperity. The advertisement belonged to a woman named Daphne Wright, a spiritual advisor residing 250 miles away in the bustling city of Houston. Daphne claimed she possessed a profound ability to lift curses and restore good fortune. Desperate to save the family business and protect the legacy they had built, Chow reached out to her. He traveled to Houston for a consultation, and Daphne performed a ritual. For a brief, shining moment, the family felt a surge of hope. They genuinely believed that the dark clouds were parting and that their hard, hard-earned dream would be. Salvaged. However, hope placed in the wrong hands can sometimes lead down a perilous path. Instead of changing their fortunes for the better, the family unknowingly stepped into a complex web of financial exploitation. Daphne was not the benevolent guide they had imagined. She began charging exorbitant fees for her services, extending credit to the desperate family. The supposed spiritual healings did not bring customers back to the sewing machines, but they did amass a staggering debt. The family found themselves owing Daphne a sum somewhere between $250,000 and $280,000. The weight of this secret debt hung over the family until the morning of June 10th, 2012. At exactly 7:29 in the morning, emergency dispatchers in Arlington received a frantic, heartbreaking phone call. It was Chow Tran. His voice trembled with anxiety that transcended language barriers. He asked for a welfare check on his elderly in-laws. The dispatcher, a calm and steady professional, asked for the names. Chow spelled out his father-in-law's name, letter by letter, explaining that Long was in his 70s. Chow explained that his teenage son had gone and knocked on his grandparents' door, but there had been no answer. The family had gathered outside the apartment, noticing an open window, an unusual sight that sent a chill down their spines. Something felt deeply wrong, but they were too terrified to cross the threshold. When Officer Weller received the dispatch, he responded with a swift dedication that characterized his 14 years of service. Welfare checks were a routine part of police work, but rarely did they occur this early in the morning, and rarely did they involve an entire family standing outside an apartment, paralyzed by worry. Upon arriving, Officer Weller stepped into the residence, his experienced eyes immediately scanning the environment. The apartment was in disarray, bearing the telltale signs of a frantic search or a burglary. Furniture was overturned. Compact discs were scattered across the floor. An unnatural silence permeated the air. He called out, his voice echoing off the walls, but received no answer. He methodically checked the living room, the kitchen, and the bathroom. Everything was empty. The only room remaining was the primary bedroom. Entering the bedroom, Officer Weller was initially focused on finding the couple, hoping they had perhaps just gone out for a morning walk and forgotten a lockup. He turned to leave, thinking all was well, when his flashlight illuminated a series of smudges on the wall. Near a small closet, a heavy sense of dread settled in his chest. His instincts, honed by over a decade on the force, urged caution. Yet his duty propelled him forward. He opened the closet door and found Long and Hong. The discovery was profoundly tragic. The beloved couple, who had worked so hard to build a life of peace and prosperity, had been taken from the world in a manner that defied all reason. They had been bound, their breaths stolen away. The solemn stillness of the closet stood in stark contrast to the beautiful, vibrant lives they had lived. Officer Weller, a veteran who had seen the darkest corners of human nature, was left momentarily speechless. The shock was overwhelming. He stepped back out into the living room, gathering his composure before keying his radio to request a supervisor and a crime scene unit. When the homicide detectives arrived, including investigators with 21 years of experience, they were deeply moved by the tragic scene. The crime was shocking in its severity, especially considering the gentle nature of the victims. Who could possibly wish harm upon two sweet, hard-working elders who had never bothered anyone? As the detectives processed the scene, they noticed several peculiar details. It appeared a violent struggle had taken place near the front door, yet the living room contained bizarre artifacts that felt remarkably out of place. On the coffee table rested a plate with crushed prescription pills and a discarded marijuana cigarette. Most striking of all was a blue bandana wrapped deliberately around a beer bottle. It looked like a calling card, a dramatic signature left by a local street gang. Arlington did have active youth gangs known for extortion, and the color of the bandana was significant. Yet, to the seasoned detectives, the scene felt almost theatrical. It was too perfect, too deliberately arranged. Gang members rarely targeted innocent elderly couples in such a highly orchestrated manner, and they certainly did not usually leave their identifying colors perfectly displayed, like props on a stage. The investigators theorized that the crime scene had been staged to mislead them. The detectives meticulously gathered every piece of evidence. They collected the blue bandana, the beer bottle, and the marijuana cigarette, sending them off to the laboratory in the hopes of extracting a genetic profile. They interviewed Chow Tran, who acted as the primary spokesperson for the grieving family. Chow appeared cooperative, providing a detailed timeline of the previous evening. He explained that the family had gathered to celebrate Long's birthday. They had eaten traditional food, laughed, and played cards until just past 10 o'clock at night. The elderly couple had received a ride home, and that was the last time they were seen alive. When asked about potential enemies or financial disputes, Chow maintained that they had none. The sewing business had struggled, he admitted, and they had even consulted a spiritual advisor to lift what they believed to be a curse. But there was no mention of the crippling debt. The detectives did discover that the couple possessed a substantial life insurance policy, valued at over $1 million, intended to keep the business afloat in the event of a tragedy. Chow and his wife were the primary beneficiaries. While this raised an investigative eyebrow, Chow's alibi for the night of the incident was rock solid, corroborated by multiple family members. The laboratory results returned, providing a glimmer of hope. A genetic profile was successfully extracted from a marijuana cigarette left at the scene. However, when compared against the national database, the Federal Bureau of Investigation's combined DNA index system, there was no match. The suspect was a ghost. It could have been an adult with no prior criminal record, or perhaps a minor whose genetic information had never been entered into the system. Despite swabbing dozens of individuals, conducting extensive neighborhood canvasses, and following every conceivable lead, the trail went cold. For over 3 years, the memories of Long and Hong lived on in the hearts of their community, while the detectives silently carried the weight of the unsolved mystery, refusing to surrender hope. Sometimes, justice arrives in the most unexpected and gently humorous of ways. In October 2015, a rather bizarre incident occurred in Houston. A young man named Willie Guillory, who had recently turned 18, decided to steal a horse. It was an absurd, seemingly random act of youthful foolishness, but in the state of Texas, horse theft remains a serious felony. Because Willie was now legally an adult and had committed a felony, standard procedure dictated that his genetic profile be collected and entered into the national database. The database, a silent and tireless watchman, performed its automated search. Suddenly, a notification flashed across the screens of the Arlington Police Department. The profile of the Houston horse thief was a perfect, undeniable match to the genetic material left on the marijuana cigarette at the Arlington crime. Seen back in 2012, at the time of the tragic incident, Willie had been a mere 16 years old, a juvenile whose identity was shielded from the system. His reckless decision to steal a horse had inadvertently unraveled a 3-year-old murder mystery. The detectives could hardly believe the irony, a moment of light-hearted disbelief amidst a solemn investigation. On October 17th, 2015, detectives brought Willie Guillory into the station, officially arresting him for a minor parole violation to bring him into the interrogation room. Initially, Willie played the part of the tough, oblivious youth. He swore he had never been to Arlington, promising the officers he knew nothing about the incident. The seasoned detective, employing a masterful mix of patience and educational explanation, calmly detailed the indisputable science of genetic profiling. He explained exactly how the evidence worked and how it proved Willie was inside that apartment. The facade crumbled. The weight of the secret he had carried since childhood proved too much to bear. Willie broke down, tears streaming down his face, and confessed. He admitted he was there, but he insisted he did not act alone. He pointed the finger at his uncle, 52-year-old Bobby Guillory, Willie explained that his life circumstances had left him vulnerable, and when his uncle commanded him to travel 3 hours to Arlington to help with a job, he felt he had no choice. Willie's confession provided the missing pieces of the puzzle. He detailed the intricate plan his uncle had devised to stage the apartment to look like a gang. Related burglary. They scattered the compact discs, left the crushed pills, draped the blue bandana, and Willie, in a moment of teenage carelessness, had smoked a marijuana cigarette and left it behind. Willie revealed that his uncle had possessed a key to the apartment, allowing them to wait in the shadows. When Long and Hong returned from their joyous birthday celebration, the tragedy unfolded. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. The detectives asked Willie why he and his uncle would target 2 innocent strangers. Willie explained that it was not a random act of violence, but a contracted assignment. He revealed that his uncle was working on behalf of a woman named Daphne Wright. Willie had met Daphne through his uncle. He recounted how Daphne had demanded money from people who owed her, coldly stating that if they did not pay, she wanted them dealt with. The illusion of the gang burglary was shattered, replaced by the chilling reality of financial dispute orchestrated from afar. The detectives realized they were dealing with an inside job of devastating proportions. They immediately shifted their focus to Bobby Guillory, locating him in Katy, Texas. In December of 2015, Bobby, a man with no prior criminal history, was arrested. The presence of a search warrant for his genetic profile was enough to break his resolve. He confessed, his voice heavy with remorse, admitting he had been terrified the entire time. He explained that in 2011, he had been unemployed, desperate, and hungry. Daphne Wright, a woman he knew through a friend, recognized his vulnerability and offered him $10,000 to carry out her demands. Bobby described Daphne as a spiritual loan shark, a woman who manipulated the faith of others for immense financial gain. He confirmed that Long and Chow owed Daphne an astronomical sum, ballooning near $280,000. When the family could not pay, Daphne decided to collect on their life insurance policies. She was a mastermind, dictating every detail of the operation. But when the detectives asked Bobby how Daphne had acquired the key to the apartment, he dropped a bombshell that left the investigators reeling. He claimed the key came from Chow Tran. The investigation had come full circle, arriving back at the grieving son-in-law who had made the initial distress call. The detectives were blindsided. They had developed a relationship with Chow, checking on his well-being over the years, viewing him as a victim of a terrible tragedy. Now, he was implicated in the very conspiracy that claimed his family. Before confronting Chow, the authorities focused on capturing the mastermind. In August of 2016, detectives arrived at Daphne Wright's Houston home. She was a commanding presence, a woman who ruled her household with an iron will, her husband Howard appearing entirely subservient. When questioned, Daphne remained cold and evasive. She admitted to knowing Chow as a client and acknowledged the debt, casually remarking that people always pay what they owe. She refused to elaborate further, demanding legal representation. The police executed a search warrant on Daphne's residence, uncovering a trove of evidence. They found meticulous ledgers detailing her spiritual fees. She was charging desperate people $10, $20, $30, and even $40,000 for simple rituals. Her business was built on the exploitation of hope. She was arrested and taken into custody, her reign of manipulation finally brought to an end. The final, most complex piece of the puzzle remained Chow Tran. Financial records subpoenaed by the police revealed that after receiving the insurance payout, Chow had not reopened the beloved family business. Instead, he had purchased a new home and seemingly moved on to secure a watertight case against Daphne Wright, the orchestrator of the entire scheme. Prosecutors faced a difficult moral dilemma. They needed insider testimony to definitively link Daphne to the financial motive and the hiring of the Guillorys. In a move that highlighted the complex, sometimes painful reality of the justice system, prosecutors offered Chow Tran immunity in exchange for his full testimony. In the safety of the courtroom, under the shield of immunity, Chow took the stand. He painted a picture of Daphne as a terrifying figure, a woman who wielded her supposed spiritual powers like a weapon. He claimed she blackmailed the family, threatening them with devastating curses if the debt was not paid. In a bizarre twist, Chow testified that it was actually his mother-in-law, Hong, who had bravely suggested sacrificing herself so the family could collect the insurance money and escape Daphne's wrath. It was a narrative that the seasoned detectives found entirely unbelievable, a desperate attempt by a complicit man to minimize his own guilt. The defense attorneys fiercely attacked Chow's credibility, pointing out the absolute lack of documentation for the massive debt and highlighting that Chow was the sole beneficiary of the $850,000 that eventually cleared. Despite the turbulent and contradictory testimonies, the jury listened carefully to the presentation of evidence. In September of 2019, after years of tireless investigation, the jury returned their verdict. They recognized the irrefutable evidence of Daphne Wright's orchestration of the plot. She was convicted and handed a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice, in its most resolute form, was served to the mastermind. Willie and Bobby Guillory also faced the consequences of their actions, the wheels of accountability turning steadily. Yet, for the dedicated detectives who had worked the case for 7 long years, the resolution carried a bittersweet taste. The fact that Chow Tran walked away completely free, protected by his immunity agreement, was a heavy burden to bear. The lead investigator, reflecting on the arduous journey, found solace in a profound philosophical belief. He knew that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, eventually finds the light. He believed that the universe has a way of balancing the scales, and that those who orchestrate harm will ultimately answer for their deeds, in this life or the next. The story of Long Nguyen and Hong Lee is not merely a tale of a tragic end. It is a powerful narrative about the vulnerability of the human spirit, the lengths to which people will go to protect their dreams, and the unwavering dedication of those who stand watch over society. It is a reminder of the beautiful, vibrant community in Arlington that continues to thrive, honoring the memory of the sweet, hard-working couple who journeyed across the world to build a life of love through the diligent work of law enforcement and a touch of ironic fate in the form of a stolen horse. The darkness was pushed back, allowing the enduring light of justice and community resilience to shine brightly once more. Chapter 1. The Fabric of Hope. The morning sun over the city of Arlington, in the state of Texas, did not rise in a hurry. It crept slowly over the wide, flat horizons, painting the quiet suburban neighborhoods in warm shades of amber and gold. In this corner of the world, thousands of miles away from the emerald rice paddies of Vietnam, an elderly couple had built a sanctuary. Long Nguyen and his beloved wife, Hong Lu, spent their mornings listening to the gentle hum of the Texas breeze, a sound so different from the bustling streets of Saigon they had left behind in the year 2000. To understand the depth of their journey is to understand the heart of the American dream. When they first arrived in the United States, they carried very little in terms of material wealth. What they did possess, however, was an inexhaustible reservoir of determination, a deep love for their 3 children, and a mastery of the textile arts. Within a few years of their arrival, their small apartment was filled with the rhythmic, comforting click-clack of commercial sewing machines. They established a family business, transforming rolls of vibrant cloth into beautifully crafted garments. It was a true family endeavor. They enlisted the help of their son-in-law, Chow Tran, a young man of 38 years who possessed the gift of fluent English. Chow became the public face of the enterprise, navigating conversations with corporate contractors, shaking hands with suppliers, and translating the dreams of his in-laws into prosperous realities. For nearly a decade, the heavens seemed to smile upon their endeavors. The pinnacle of their success arrived when they secured a highly coveted, lucrative contract to manufacture garments for a global entertainment giant, none other than the legendary Disney brand. For a time, their workspace was a joyous world of colorful fabrics, laughter, and the bright promise of a legacy that would secure the future of their grandchildren. But economic tides are notoriously fickle. By the year 2011, the grand contract had concluded, and the gentle hum of the sewing machines began to quiet down. The steady stream of orders slowed to a trickle, and financial anxiety began to shadow the family home. In times of deep uncertainty, human beings often look backward to find a path forward. Long and Hong, raised in the ancient traditions of their homeland, turned their thoughts toward the spiritual realm. They believed in the delicate balance of luck, energy, and the protective deities who safeguard household prosperity. When traditional avenues failed, they wondered if a spiritual cloud, a silent curse, had settled over their business. Seeking a way to lift this perceived shadow, Chow Tran and his mother-in-law turned to the pages of a local Vietnamese newspaper. There, among the advertisements for community services and local markets, they found an entry for a spiritual advisor located 250 miles away in the coastal city of Houston. Her name was Daphne Wright. She promised to banish misfortune, dismantle spiritual obstacles, and restore the flow of abundance to those who had lost their way. Chapter 2, A Sudden Silence in the Morning. The date was June 10th, the year 2012. The clock on the wall showed exactly 7:29 in the morning when the tranquility of the Arlington Emergency Dispatch Center was interrupted by a phone call. Chow Tran was on the line, his voice thick with apprehension. He requested a welfare check on his elderly in-laws, explaining that they had not answered their phone and that his teenage son, who had gone to knock on their door, was met only with silence. The family had gathered outside the apartment, noting with growing dread that a window to the residence was slightly open. Officer Weller was the first to arrive on the scene. As a seasoned officer with 14 years of dedicated service, he immediately noticed that the atmosphere was unusual. It was far too early in the morning for a typical welfare check, and the sight of an entire extended family waiting anxiously on the pavement suggested that something was profoundly wrong. Step by step, Officer Weller approached the apartment. The door was unlocked. Upon entering, the interior presented a scene of disarray. It bore the classic hallmarks of a burglary. Drawers were pulled open, compact discs were scattered across the floor, and the living room furniture was in a state of upheaval. Officer Weller called out into the quiet apartment, his voice echoing off the walls. There was no response. He systematically checked the kitchen, the living room, and the bathroom, finding them completely empty. Only the master bedroom remained. Inside the bedroom, the officer scanned the space with his flashlight. At first glance, the room appeared vacant, but as he turned to leave, the beam of his light caught a series of dark hand smudges on the wall adjacent to a remarkably small closet. A heavy silence filled the room. Officer Weller hesitated, a quiet instinct urging him to pause. Yet duty prevailed. He reached out, grasped the handle, and opened the closet door. There, bound together and hidden in the darkness of the small space, were Long Nguyen and Hong Lu. They had been bound with silver duct tape, their heads wrapped completely. There were clear signs of blunt force trauma to their heads, likely inflicted by a heavy, metallic object. The shock of the discovery momentarily paralyzed the veteran officer. He walked out of the bedroom into the center of the living room, gathering his composure before finally speaking into his radio to summon a supervisor and the homicide unit. Chapter 3, The Puzzle of the Blue Bandana. Within the hour, the apartment was filled with forensic investigators and lead homicide detectives, including a veteran investigator with 21 years of experience in solving the city's most complex cases. Even for a seasoned detective, the sheer cruelty of the scene was difficult to comprehend. Long and Hong were gentle. hard-working souls who had spent their lives contributing to the community. They had no known enemies. On the coffee table in the living room, investigators discovered a curious collection of items. There was a plate containing crushed prescription medication, a discarded marijuana cigarette, and most notably, a light blue bandana wrapped carefully around an empty beer bottle. To the untrained eye, these items pointed directly toward a tragic burglary committed by a local street gang. Arlington was home to several active youth gangs known to use specific colors, including light blue, to mark their presence. Yet, the lead detective remained deeply skeptical. In his decades of investigating crimes, he had learned that sometimes a scene can appear too perfect. The placement of the bandana and the drug paraphernalia felt less like a chaotic robbery and more like a carefully staged performance designed to mislead the police. As a forensic team meticulously gathered hair fibers, latent fingerprints, and genetic material from a marijuana cigarette, the detectives turned their attention to the family. Chow Tran, acting as the primary spokesperson due to his strong command of the English language, provided the detectives with a detailed timeline of the previous evening. June 9th had been a celebration of Long Wen's birthday. The family had gathered for a joyful dinner, playing cards and sharing stories until approximately 10 o'clock in the evening. Afterward, another relative had driven the elderly couple back to their apartment. That was the last time they were seen alive. When asked about potential financial motives, Chow admitted that the family's sewing business had struggled significantly, but he claimed there was very little cash kept within the home. He expressed absolute bewilderment as to who would wish to harm his gentle in-laws. The mystery deepened a few days later when Detective Stewart received an unexpected phone call from a life insurance representative. The representative revealed that Long and Hong were covered by a highly substantial joint life insurance policy valued at $1 million. When the detective inquired about the named beneficiaries, one name stood out clearly: Chow Tran. Chapter 4: The Cold Trail and the Hidden Name. On June 13th, the year 2012, detectives invited Chow Tran to the station to discuss the insurance policy. Chow remained cooperative and calm. He explained that the policy had been established to safeguard the commercial sewing business, ensuring that if any tragedy befell the elders, the family would have the financial resources necessary to keep the business operational and support the grandchildren. Furthermore, Chow and the remaining family members possessed solid, mutually verified alibis for the entire night of the crime. They had been together, enjoying a family gathering far from the scene of the tragedy. The forensic laboratory processed the genetic material recovered from the marijuana cigarette, hoping to find a match within the federal database known as a combined DNA index system. However, the results returned negative. The genetic profile did not match any registered individuals, nor did it match any of the family members who had willingly provided samples. With no database matches and no immediate leads, the investigation slowly ground to a halt. The neighborhood returned to its quiet routines. The sewing machines remained silent. And for more than 3 years, the files on the deaths of Long Nguyen and Hong gathered dust in the archives of the Arlington Police Department. Then, in the autumn of the year 2015, a completely unrelated event in a neighboring county breathed new life into a forgotten case. A 19-year-old young man named Willie Guillory was arrested in Houston for a felony offense involving the theft of a horse. Because a felony conviction requires the collection of a genetic profile for the federal database, Willie's genetic blueprint was entered into the system for the very first time. Within days, a computer system in Washington flagged a perfect match. The genetic material found on the discarded marijuana cigarette at the crime scene in Arlington, Texas, in the year 2012 belonged to Willie Guillory. At the time of the crime, Willie had been only 16 years old, which explained why his profile had never been in the adult database. Chapter 5: The Web of the Spiritual Advisor. On October 17th, The year 2015, investigators traveled to interview Willie Guillory. Confronted with the scientific certainty of his genetic profile being present inside the apartment, the young man broke down in tears and confessed. He revealed that he had not acted alone. He had been led to Arlington by his 49-year-old uncle, Bobby Guillory. Willie explained that his uncle had been approached by a prominent spiritual advisor in Houston, named Daphne Wright. According to Willie, Daphne was the orchestrator of the entire plan. She had reportedly claimed that the elderly couple owed her an astronomical sum of money, somewhere between $250,000 and $280,000, for spiritual rituals, curse-lifting ceremonies, and prosperity blessings performed over the previous year. When the family's business failed to recover, the debt had continued to grow. Daphne, unwilling to lose her investment, had learned of the substantial life insurance policies. She allegedly proposed a dark solution to recoup her funds, recruiting Bobby Guillory with the promise of a $10,000 payment to execute the deed. Armed with this astonishing revelation, detectives arrested Bobby Guillory on December 16th, the year 2015. Bobby, who had no prior criminal record, confessed to his involvement, confirming that Daphne Wright was indeed the mastermind who had coordinated the logistics, provided the keys to the apartment, and demanded the debt be settled at any cost. Yet, a shocking question remained. How had Daphne obtained the key to the elderly couple's apartment? During his interrogation, Bobby looked directly at the detectives and uttered a name that sent a chill through the room. Chow Tran. Chapter 6. The Verdict of Time. The revelation of Chow Tran's potential involvement painted a far more complex picture of devotion, fear, and financial desperation. Investigators learned that the family had become deeply ensnared in Daphne's spiritual influence. They believed implicitly in her power to control fortunes and manipulate destiny. Chow claimed that his mother-in-law, Hong, had grown so desperate to save her family from bankruptcy and the spiritual wrath of the advisor that she had contemplated sacrificing herself so the family could collect the insurance money to pay the staggering debt. While prosecutors harbored deep doubts about this narrative, they recognized that to secure a conviction against the primary instigator, Daphne Wright, they required Chow's detailed testimony. In exchange for his full cooperation and truthful testimony against Bobby, Willie, and Daphne, the state offered Chow immunity from prosecution. In August of the year 2019, the trial of Daphne Wright commenced. The courtroom was filled with quiet tension as the details of the spiritual business were laid bare. The prosecution presented ledger books seized from Daphne's residence, detailing extraordinary fees of tens of thousands of dollars charged to vulnerable clients seeking luck and blessings. Chow Tran took the stand, describing Daphne as an incredibly powerful, demanding figure who held an absolute psychological grip over his family's actions and decisions. The defense countered by arguing that Chow was the true beneficiary of the tragedy, pointing out that the insurance proceeds had gone directly into his bank accounts, enabling the purchase of a new home. Ultimately, after days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty. Daphne Wright was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Bobby and Willie Guillory likewise faced the consequences of their actions under the law. Though the legal proceedings reached their formal conclusion, the detectives who had poured their lives into the case remained reflective. The memory of the gentle weavers, Long and Hong, who had crossed oceans in search of a peaceful life, lingered in the hearts of the community. Their journey stood as a poignant reminder of the enduring power of family, the tragic dangers of unchecked greed, and the relentless light of justice that, even after years of darkness, eventually finds its way into the deepest corners of the world. Chapter 1. The Promise of the Lone Star State. The sun always seemed to rise with peculiar warmth over Arlington, Texas. It was a sprawling city in Tarrant County, a place where the concrete highways stretched out like giant ribbons connecting a beautiful mosaic of different cultures. By the late 90s and the early 2000s, the city had become a sanctuary of hope for families from all over the world. Among them were Long Nguyen and his beloved wife, Hong Lu. When they immigrated to the United States from Vietnam in the year 2000, they brought with them very little in the way of material wealth, but their hearts were overflowing with dreams. They possessed an enduring love for each other, a deep respect for their time-honored heritage, and an unwavering commitment to their 3 children and grandchildren. For them, the American dream was not about grand luxury. It was about building a safe harbor where their family could flourish. The Vietnamese community in Arlington was vibrant and tight-knit. The first wave of immigrants had arrived after 1975, following the fall of Saigon. Over the decades, they had built businesses, temples, churches, and neighborhoods that felt like home. Long and Hong chose Arlington because they saw a place where they could combine their traditional values with modern opportunities. They were a sweet, gentle couple. Neighbors often saw them walking hand in hand through their neighborhood, offering warm smiles and kind waves to everyone they passed. To build a legacy for their family, Long and Hong started a commercial sewing business. It was a modest enterprise at first, filled with a steady hum of sewing machines and the vibrant colors of fabrics. They enlisted the help of their son-in-law, Chow Tran, a 38-year-old man who spoke fluent English and possessed a natural knack for business. Chow became the public face of the company, the one who negotiated contracts, spoke with suppliers, and handled the daily interactions with corporate clients. For nearly a decade, their hard work paid off handsomely. The sewing business expanded, and they secured a lucrative contract to make garments for a commercial giant, producing beautiful items for major brands, including Disney. During these years, laughter filled their home, and the future seemed brighter than the Texas sky. Chapter 2: The Shadow of Misfortune. But life, much like the patterns on a woven fabric, has its twists and turns. By the year 2011, the family sewing business faced a severe downturn. The lucrative contract with Disney was lost, and a string of financial difficulties began to weigh heavily on the family. In traditional Vietnamese culture, when a family experiences a sudden run of bad luck, it is not uncommon to seek spiritual answers. For thousands of years, people have believed in the power of spiritual balance, seeking the blessings of the lucky god and the money protection god to bring peace and prosperity. When a family faces a major crisis, such as a business failure or personal distress, they often seek the guidance of a spiritual advisor to lift curses and restore harmony. Hoping to find a solution, Chow Tran and his mother-in-law, Hong, began searching through a local Vietnamese newspaper. They found an advertisement for a spiritual advisor named Daphne Wright, who operated out of Houston, located about 250 miles away. The advertisement claimed she could remove bad curses, bring good fortune, and protect families from negative energy. Encouraged by his family, Chow contacted Daphne and arranged a meeting at her home in Houston. He hoped that her rituals would turn their fortunes around. However, instead of finding relief, the family unknowingly stepped into a dark web of greed. Daphne Wright was not a healer. She was an opportunist who used spiritual manipulation to control her clients. Over the course of a year, as the sewing business continued to struggle, Daphne began charging exorbitant fees for her services. She ran up a massive tab on credit, claiming that more expensive rituals were required to lift the stubborn curse. The debt ballooned to a staggering sum between $250,000 and $280,000. Terrified of spiritual retribution and desperate to save their family, Long, Hong, and Chow continued to pour whatever money they had into Daphne's hands. Chapter 3: A Quiet Morning Broken. On the morning of June 10, 2012, at 7:29 in the morning, the quiet of a Texas Sunday was broken. Emergency dispatchers received a call from Chow Tran. He sounded highly anxious, requesting a welfare check on his elderly in-laws, Long Nguyen and Hong Lu. He explained that his family had gathered outside the apartment and noticed that a window was open, but no one was answering the door. Officer Weller, a dedicated member of the Arlington Police Department with 14 years of experience, was dispatched to the residence. When he arrived, he found the family standing outside, looking deeply concerned. The early hour and the palpable tension made it clear that this was not a routine welfare check. Upon entering the apartment, Officer Weller noticed signs of what appeared to be a burglary. The living room was in disarray, with compact discs scattered about and furniture moved. Officer Weller called out, but there was only silence. He checked the kitchen, the bathroom, and the living spaces, finding them empty. Finally, he entered the bedroom. Initially, the room seemed vacant, but as he turned to leave, his flashlight caught hand smudges on the wall next to a small closet. A deep instinct told him to hesitate, but his duty compelled him to open the door. Inside the closet, a tragic scene awaited him. Long and Hong had been bound with duct tape and were completely unresponsive. Officer Weller immediately stepped out to the living room, composed himself, and called for a supervisor and the crime scene unit. Chapter 4. The Tangled Web of Clues. Arlington homicide investigators, including Detective Stewart, a veteran with 21 years of experience, arrived at the scene. The physical evidence was puzzling. The apartment had been ransacked, suggesting a robbery. On the coffee table, investigators found a plate of crushed prescription pills and a marijuana cigarette. Additionally, a light blue bandana was wrapped around a beer bottle, a detail that initially pointed toward local gang activity, as light blue was a color associated with certain active Vietnamese youth gangs in the area. However, Detective Stewart was skeptical. The crime scene felt too-staged, as if someone had deliberately left a trail of clues to mimic a gang-related robbery. As the investigation proceeded, detectives attended the autopsy at the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's office. The findings were heartbreaking. The victims had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, but the actual cause of death was suffocation due to the extensive layers of duct tape wrapped around their faces. It was clear that the perpetrators had acted with deliberate, lethal intent. Shortly after the autopsy, Detective Stewart received a call from an insurance company. The detective learned that Long and Hong had a life insurance policy worth $1 million, and one of the primary beneficiaries was their son-in-law, Chow Tran. When questioned, Chow cooperated fully. He provided a detailed, airtight alibi for himself and his family, explaining that they had been celebrating his father-in-law's birthday until 10 o'clock the night, after which they went straight home. Investigators collected DNA and fingerprint samples from Chow and other family members, but none of them matched the evidence found at the scene, including the DNA recovered from the marijuana cigarette. The case eventually went cold for more than 2 years. Chapter 5. The Whispers of Time. For 2 years, the investigation remained at a standstill. Homicide detectives had interviewed more than 50 people, but no solid leads emerged. Then, in October 2015, a breakthrough occurred. A young man named Willie Guillory was arrested for stealing a horse in Houston, which is a felony in the state of Texas. Because of this felony conviction, his DNA profile was entered into the national database known as CODIS. Within days, the system flagged a match. Willie's DNA matched the DNA found on the marijuana cigarette left at the crime scene in Arlington back in 2012. At the time of the murders, Willie had been only 16 years old, which was why his profile was not previously in the system. On October 17, 2015, investigators brought Willie in for questioning. When confronted with the scientific evidence, the young man broke down and confessed. He revealed that he had not acted alone. He had been recruited by his uncle, Bobby Guillory. Chapter 6. Unmasking the Puppeteer. Willie explained that on June 9, 2012, his Uncle Bobby had driven him from Houston to Arlington. Bobby had been given a key to the apartment to stage a burglary. The plan orchestrated by a spiritual advisor named Daphne Wright, was to make the crime look like a gang-related robbery to help Daphne collect on a massive debt. On December 16, 2015, detectives arrested 52-year-old Bobby Guillory in Katy, Texas, on 2 counts of capital murder. Faced with the evidence, Bobby also confessed. He explained that he had been laid off, was struggling financially, and had been promised $10,000 by Daphne to carry out the deed. Bobby confirmed that Daphne Wright was a mastermind behind the entire plot. When Chow and Hong could not pay the $280,000 debt they owed her, Daphne learned about their substantial life insurance policies. She pressured the family, suggesting that they could collect on the policies to settle their financial obligations. According to Bobby, Daphne obtained the key to the apartment directly from Chow Tran. Chapter 7, The Pursuit of Justice. With this crucial information, detectives obtained a search warrant for Daphne Wright's home in Houston. Inside, they discovered detailed financial ledgers showing that she charged clients tens of thousands of dollars for spiritual services. To secure a conviction against Daphne, prosecutors offered Chow Tran a plea deal of immunity in exchange for his full and honest testimony. Chow agreed to cooperate. On August 26, 2019, the trial of Daphne Wright began. Chow took the stand and described Daphne as a greedy, manipulative woman who used her spiritual influence to control his family. He claimed that he felt completely powerless under her psychological grip. The defense argued that Chow was a willing participant who wanted the insurance payout for himself, noting that there was no written documentation of the alleged $280,000 debt. However, the jury ultimately found the prosecution's case compelling. In September of 2019, Daphne Wright was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Bobby Guillory and Willie Guillory also faced justice for their roles in the conspiracy. While the legal resolution brought some closure, the memory of Long, Nguyen, and Hong remained a poignant reminder of the importance of community, vigilance, and the pursuit of truth. The dedicated efforts of the Arlington Police Department ensured that those who preyed on the vulnerable were held accountable, allowing community to heal and remember the sweet, hard-working couple for the love and warmth they brought to the Lone Star State. The morning sun of Texas has a way of rising with a sudden golden intensity, casting long and warm shadows across the pavement of Arlington. It was June 10th, 2012, a day that began like many others in Tarrant County, with a gentle hum of early morning traffic and the sweet scent of blooming crepe myrtles carrying on the warm breeze. But beneath the quiet suburban surface, a deeply moving story of family, faith, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of justice was about to unfold. The gathering on the sidewalk. At exactly 7:29 in the morning, the Emergency Dispatch Center in Arlington received a call. The voice on the other end belonged to Chow Tran, a 38-year-old Vietnamese immigrant whose tone was thick with mixture confusion and growing worry. He was calling to request a welfare check on his elderly in-laws, Long Nguyen and Hong Lu. The dispatcher, trained to remain calm and collected, listened carefully as Chow explained the situation in his earnest, accented English. "My dad's name is Long, last name Nguyen. He is 70-something right now. My family, my wife, my son, we want to check on them because they did not answer the phone. They saw the window was open, and everything inside seemed to have fallen down. We are too scared to go inside." To the responding officers, a welfare check early in the morning was somewhat unusual. Usually, such requests came later in the day, after hours of unanswered calls. Officer Weller, a dedicated veteran of the force with 14 years of experience, was dispatched to the apartment complex. When Weller arrived, he noticed a large group of people standing outside on the sidewalk. It was an entire extended family, their faces etched with anxiety. The sheer number of people waiting outside immediately signaled to Weller that this was not a routine call. The family members explained that they had knocked on the door, but received no response. Looking closer,